Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hello, I'm Squadron Leader Peter Lisney, and in this episode we travel down under with 101 Squadron and 6 Squadron. We'll also reheat a few stories, just in case you missed them. But first, see if you can identify this noise. Find out if you're right at the end of this episode. Now, exercises are crucial to ensuring combat readiness and strengthening relationships between partner and allied nations. Last month, the RAF sent a squadron of Typhoons and a Voyager aircraft to Australia's Northern Territory to take part in exercise Pitch Black. Our correspondent AS1 Victoria Andrews was on the detachment and brings you this report.
There's so many things you have to consider and get right to project power that an activity like this actually provides all of us with a chance to rehearse that.
From the chefs, to the photographers, to the aircrew, to the engineers. These are all the elements that make a detachment work effectively.
There's all kinds of injects that, as much as you try and think about it before you go, you end up with something cropping up at the time, and it requires fairly quick decision making.
It's one of the things that Voyager does, and what an air-to-air fueling tanker can bring to the party, as it were, is the force projection to bring fast jets to anywhere in the world.
You're probably working with countries you haven't worked with before, and I know for the aircrew that's been really valuable training.
It's been an incredible exercise. It's probably been the best exercise detachment that I've done in 20 years in the RAF.
I'm AS1 Victoria Andrews, and you might be more familiar with hearing me at the end of each podcast where I bring you the reheat segment. Well, I've swapped roles this week, and I'm looking forward to sharing my experience of exercise Pitch Black with you and introducing you to some of the people I worked alongside while out in Australia. The coastal air base of Royal Australian Air Force Darwin in the country's Northern Territory was the exercise's main hub, with activity at RAF bases Tyndall, 200 miles inland, and Amberley in Queensland too. 2 imposing Bristol Bloodhound ground-to-air missiles meet you as you approach the gate, and the airbase itself is a heritage-listed operational base. It opened in 1940, and many of its buildings date back to this time. Exercise Pitch Black then. It's a large-scale exercise held every 2 years in the top end, as the Northern Territory is known. 16 nations made the journey, which meant an influx of about 2,500 military personnel and 100 aircraft to the area. To tell me more about the exercise and what we could expect over the course of the detachment, I spoke with Pitch Black 22 Exercise Commander, Air Commodore Tim Alsop of the Royal Australian Air Force.
Pitch Black is Australia's premier air combat activity. It's our premier exercise that we've run since about 1981, and it happens every 2 years, and it's grown and grown over time to what we're seeing this year on 22, which is just staggering. Pitch Black's grown from something that started as an Australian-only activity, and the name comes from the fact that it's centred around doing some really complex training at night. And when you fly over the Northern Territory at night, it is pitch black. Not a lot of creativity there. It's grown from that point into something that was a close group of participants. So it was we saw America, we saw the New Zealanders were involved very early, and Singapore has actually been probably one of our most long-term partners for pitch black. They recognised the value of it very early, and they have a very unique airspace problem in Singapore, which we have plenty of here. And so they've become a bedrock. But this year's fascinating in that we see the RAF hit down here, which is incredible. I mean, we have such a long and deep history with the RAF. We have The French Air Force here again, they have participated in the past. We have Japan and the Republic of Korea for the first time as well, and the German Air Force is here en masse. And that European and Japanese, South Korean influence brings a new depth to this, because the capabilities from those nations are very high end. They're all very, very competent forces, and it allows us to go to another level of complexity, really, with the scale of this activity. One of the fascinating things we've seen, and one of the great strengths of this exercise, which is deliberately aimed at tactical air combat execution. And what that means is it's about how we plan a single, very complex mission. By concentrating in on that tactical level of training, it's actually the human beings that we're developing. So it allows us to provide an opportunity to train mission commanders. So that's someone who's got a lot of experience as either a pilot, a weapon systems operator, an electronic warfare officer, or an air battle manager, who can use those years of experience to now guide the whole team through a mission. And they own the problem right from the start of planning of the day prior, right through to the debrief. So it's a big job, and it's their plan. And so they have to plan it quickly. You have to then brief it coherently and quickly so that everyone understands how it's going to work, understands the safety plan, and understands the contingencies. And then once you actually start executing this thing, they then make changes on the fly. So really what we're doing is teaching problem-solving skills. That's the mission commanders. Under that you'll have what we traditionally call package commanders. So it might be the air-to-air package commander. Their job is to take all of the air-to-air assets that they have to protect the whole package. You might have a suppression of enemy air defences commander who's looking after the ground-based threat problem. There might be strike in there as well. So in the pitch black scenarios, they're often presented with 50 or 60 strike targets that have to be hit simultaneously or near simultaneously. And then you might also have some air transport in there that's going in there to insert troops or pick up something. So there's layers and layers and layers, and then finally get down to individual pilot skills and individual four-ship formation leads. So what we hope is that the participants go away from this having brought their squadrons or their people up to another level of competence that they can take back into their careers.
17 nations, 100 aircraft, 2,500 personnel. When does the planning start, and what are your main objectives when you come to planning? And of course you have this huge airspace that you can utilise as well. It must give you loads of breath.
It does. So the planning for this is long and deep. In 2008, I was the lead planner as a squadron leader for this activity, and I'm still recovering. An amazing opportunity to have to take this thing and turn it into what is needed that year, because it has changed and morphed over time. The complexity is found in a few different places for the planning. So you've got the actual air exercise itself. So airspace, procedures for getting in and out, because you're trying to get 60, 70, 80 aircraft into the airspace quickly, because as soon as the first aircraft gets airborne, the fuel clock is ticking, and fast jets burn fuel fast. And then get people through the tankers, which are in the near part of the airspace, do the activity, and then get everyone back safely at a point where fuel gauges are starting to get a little bit low. So the procedures have to be simple, coherent, and effective, and have avenues for redundancy. If for example, we black a runway, which we actually saw on this activity in the first couple of days, where a couple of aircraft had just minor hydraulic problems, but it meant that their brakes were maybe not as effective as they might have been. So they took an arrestor cable. Teams go out and recover them from the cable, but it does take 20 minutes. That's 20 minutes of everyone now holding, preserving fuel, and making decisions about do they continue back to Darwin or do you have to divert somewhere else. So back to the planning, we have the airspace planning, the actual scenario planning, which is complex in itself because each day is a different vignette, different training scenario. But then you've got the really hard stuff, the logistics and the fuel management and how do you feed everyone and where's everyone going to live?
Some of the points you mentioned there about the airspace and what we can do in that training environment. You plan your vignette, but say the runway piece, couldn't plan for that, but again, it's reacting to that. How important is that operational readiness?
Extremely. So air forces, all of our air forces inherently have that ability to project power very fast. And I don't mean just in speed, but in time. And if you have a look at how quickly the Royal Air Force spun up their plan to go across the world, I mean, there's not much further you can go really from the UK to Australia, but to do that planning very quickly and then to actually do the deployment over only a few days is a major undertaking because you've got to fix minor problems with the aircraft on the way, you've got to be able to do diplomatic clearances, you've got to manage the weather as you come through the equator, which is pretty challenging at times. So there's so many things you have to consider and get right to project power that an activity like this actually provides all of us with a chance to rehearse that. And then when you come together, I say to a lot of people that most of us, certainly Australia, has never gone into combat alone. It's never when you expect, and it's never with who you expect to fight with. So bringing 17 nations together also allows us to almost rehearse that first week or two. We work out language barriers. We look at how similar or dissimilar our procedures might be, for example, and just get to a common standard. We look at how we actually execute air combat tactics. We're all very, very similar. We're more similar than we are different. But all of our systems also have advantages and disadvantages. So how do you mash them all together to come up with a coherent package that can go and do a very, very complex job?
And you spoke there of the importance of, there's a lot of moving parts, and we have a number of our teams embedded with yours, the refuelers, chefs and medics, keeping the show on the road really behind the scenes.
Absolutely. So when we were in the planning phase with the Royal Air Force planners, that was such a fantastic offer that the RAF made, which was, we can give you some jets, which is great, but it's the fact that it was something like 15 chefs, and as you said, we've got medical teams here and others, and it's actually what's allowed us to make the activity work. So that's going to be something we'll see more of in the future, I think, is actually modelling it on what your detachment did this time. So our requests will be quite specific, I think, in future.
Venom Usher, cleared pitch black 22 airspace, all levels, 1013, altimeter to 992.
Clearance of pitch black airspace 1013, Venom.
Ultimately, as the exercise commander explained, the exercise is about testing air power capabilities and working with other nations in simulated scenarios. To understand this more, I spoke with two of our pilots, one from the Typhoon Squadron and another from the Voyager aircraft. Firstly, Squadron leader Cy Bowman, XO6 Squadron, explains who from the Lossiemouth-based Typhoon Squadron deployed to Darwin.
We brought quite a big team, so it's most of the squadron. So we brought 12 pilots out to fly the trail both out to Australia and back, and then the exercise flying once we're out there as well, which sounds like quite a lot, but actually with the amount of planning there was during the days alongside the flying activity, actually it worked out being fairly tight. So 12 pilots, and then we brought out our engineering team as well. It wasn't a full squadron deployment, but we did bring a lot of engineers. On top of that, we brought all the other people that were supporting the kind of deployment and detachment down in Australia.
And 12, as you say, might seem like a lot. With regards exercises like this, does it give the squadron an opportunity to give people a chance to train and experience new environments? Can you tell me about maybe the experience levels that was here on detachment?
Yes, we've got quite a few junior pilots on the squadron, so people that are in their first year of their first tour. And so for them, this was the first time that they'd experienced an overseas exercise. And for a few of them, I think one of the first times they've flown overseas full stop. So nothing like going big early with a detachment all the way to Australia. So it's a great experience for them just trailing across the world. Clearly we've been doing some operational flying around Europe, but to go outside the continent and on a significant trail, I think the first time Typhoon's been down to Australia. So that was a significant undertaking for those guys and really useful for them. In terms of the exercise itself, again, junior pilots have not experienced that many kind of large force exercises, so that's a big benefit of this, was that we were putting anywhere from kind of 50 up to sort of 70 aircraft in the airspace. So really big bit of airspace, an awful lot of aircraft operating in there day and night through a multitude of mission sets that Typhoon can do. So it's just a really good opportunity for them to experience that mass of aircraft operating, deconflicting, working with each other, and trying to achieve a common aim with a credible and significant number of red air as well, as a kind of hostile replication. So overall, really useful for them and something that they haven't experienced yet in their training back in the UK.
You mentioned the airspace and the missions. Could you maybe describe some of those and how they're designed and what therefore the training opportunity is?
Yeah, so we operated out of Darwin, which is up on the north coast of Australia in the Northern Territories. So right up on the coast, but the airspace was effectively all to the south of that. So a huge bit of airspace, kind of 300 miles plus, pretty much running from Darwin all the way south. Within that airspace, it was probably 100 plus miles wide. But the airspace itself, absolutely huge, and something that we don't really have in the UK. We have the kind of eastern training areas, but it kind of dwarfs those. So the benefit of that being that you could get a huge number of aircraft into the airspace. And you can simulate a multitude of missions, as we talked about already. So we did a lot of counter-air missions, mostly. So both defensive counter-air, where we simulate defending a point. So in the north of the airspace, we'd have a number of points that we were defending from enemy attack. And then we'd have red air, again up to kind of 20 or 30 aircraft potentially, with ground threat simulated as well, who'd be trying to attack those points. So we'd be trying to defend those. And then we flip it the other way around, so we do the kind of offensive counter-air elements and strike elements as well, which Typhoon can do both of, whether it be kind of air-to-air, trying to gain control of the air so that strike packages behind us can come in and strike enemy targets, or actually doing the striking ourselves. And at some points, rolling between the two, so running into target, simulating weapon releases. There was no live weapons, but we were simulating weapon releases on ground targets, and then re-rolling into effectively an air-to-air roll from that point, so we could defend further strike packages coming in to hit further targets. So actually really a plethora of mission sets that the Typhoon can do, and really good training, day and night as well. So for a few of the guys to do this kind of scale of exercise in the dark, and it is pitch black, so it's a really good exercise for all really, both experienced and the junior guys.
As XO6 Squadron, having now got us very nearly home from a 6-week detachment, is there a sense of pride seeing how the squadron has come together? Does it give you a sense of kind of security knowing that now the squadron's ready for the next tasks that come their way?
I think so. You always learn a bit about each other when you go away, and I think it's really important for us. We'd not really been away since the last time we were on Shader, which is a year ago now. So I think the opportunity to go away, operate as a team, you work very closely together, you learn good things and bad things about each other, but you learn to operate as a team. I certainly notice a closer squadron now, having been away for 5-6 weeks, and that will again pay dividends. It's all part of the learning and developing of the squadron and developing of the people. But overall, an immense amount of pride to know that we managed to get the jets out there, which was challenging in itself. That we operated and achieved what we set out to do when we were there, and actually we did a pretty good job, I think, of getting the jets back to the UK as well.
How important is that presence? It's the furthest Typhoons have ever been. The first time the Typhoon has been to Australia. It's an awful long distance to go, and we were exercising with nations we haven't exercised with before. How important is that today in general and for the forward mission of the RAF?
So I think there's a big change at the moment, I suppose, in terms of how we employ air power, and we're certainly leaning more into agile combat employment, and that's a really big thing that the Air Force is trying to figure out, trying to see how we operate, how we deploy Typhoon, and how we can operate in an agile way. And that really was a key part of this exercise, was to be able to deploy at fairly short notice 4 aircraft down to the other side of the world and back again, and try and keep it as tight as possible in terms of resource that we used.
So that's as established, area north 25, block 27. First bracket we're expecting 1030Z. It's a pair of F-18s, Sabre 41 and 42. Copied.
Clear pitch black airspace 1009.
Flight 10 James West. Everyone calls me Westy. I'm on 101 Squadron, Voyager. I've been flying for almost 20 years now, and we're out here on exercise pitch black as part of the Voyager crew.
How do you go about bringing an aircraft like the Voyager and the detachment across the world? We couldn't be much further from Brize if we tried.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a big undertaking to do that. So the trail that initially came out, and it's one of the things that Voyager does, and what an air-to-air fueling tanker can bring to the party, as it were, is force projection to bring fast jets to anywhere in the world. So the trail was from the UK to Cyprus, then Cyprus to Minad, which is near Dubai, then across to India, down to Singapore and into Darwin, and then we're going to have to do that on the way back as well.
And that would be nothing unfamiliar or unusual for the Voyager. That's what it's built to do.
Yeah, so the actual undertaking, Voyager can take just over 100 tonnes of fuel. So if it burns 6 tonnes an hour, you can imagine that it can go pretty much anywhere in the world. It's just the people that you have on there and their crew duty that would limit you. Then the fuel that we have to give to the fast jets to get them to where they need to go. So we have trail qualified crews, and that's why it's done in hops, because we'll use all the fuel that the Voyager has to offer to refuel the Typhoons or the F-35s, whichever jets we're trailing, to get them to where they need to go, reset the day, and then it'll be the next hop again, load up the Voyager with fuel, and then the next hop after that.
Coming to exercise, we exercise all over the world. The programme, a very busy programme for RAF personnel. How important is that in terms of kind of force development and the interoperability piece?
Well, I think this whole exercise has been brilliant just because the amount of nations that we've had involved, and some of the nations that we would never normally work with, allied partners. So I've never personally worked with the Japanese before, with all the Singaporeans, the Koreans, and just to get everyone into one room or one bit of airspace, understand how they work, and strengthening the connections that you have between those countries. I think that's what this exercise has really been about. And definitely Darwin and the range and the airspace it offers gives you a unique opportunity to do that.
Could you tell me, have you ever exercised in an airspace as big as the Northern Territory?
Yeah, the airspace here is unbelievable. It just gives us a lot to think about in terms of where the Typhoons or the other fast jets from other countries are operating, how we get to where we need to be to give them the fuel that they need to do their tasking. And the size of the area is not something that we would normally, because we often we're often operating in smaller areas, and so it can be a little bit false at times, because to be constrained in that way, when you have big open areas and you have to really think about where you're going to be and do we have the fuel to do what we need to do, and to be able to give away the fuel so the fast jets can do what they need to do, has been the real key here.
While here, not only have we been partaking in the sorties, but also doing an awful lot of engagement. What has the Voyager been involved in?
So Voyager's been involved in community engagement pieces. There's been a number of our personnel going to local schools, giving talks on what we do. We've had the open day, the ground static display, where we got thousands of people through the flight deck and showed them exactly what the Voyager has to offer. We've had international nights between other partners where you just have a few drinks and let your hair down a little bit. And then we've had the passenger flying, which actually yesterday was the last passenger flight we did, the last trip we did. And we did a thing called cell tanking, which is when you put a number of air-to-air refuelers in the same bit of airspace. And it might be because you're constrained in that airspace, which we were for the particular tasking yesterday. So we had 2 tankers within 500 feet at all times flying together, the fast jets joining both tankers at the same time, and we had the passengers on board, and I think they had a great time watching that.
Operations, exercises and day-to-day squadron and station activity is much more than just pilots and aircraft. There's a huge team of people working in the background, each with their own role to play, ensuring, as is the case here, that the exercise is a success. First up, I spoke to Junior Engineering Officer, or JENGO, Flight Lieutenant Jess Mcsweeney, who told me how previous roles and tours have prepared her for this deployment.
I think as the Darmo last year, I had to get used to speaking to other countries and finding who my oppo would be in another country. So whether that was the Germans that we were handing over to or the host nation with the Romanians and the Americans who ran the base, you got quite quick at working out who the right person to ask questions to was, and that's certainly been helpful here. We figured out who we needed to ask questions to in the Aussie Air Force pretty much straight away and built up some good friendships with them.
I believe for 6th Squadron this was the start of a really busy period with regards to detachments and operations.
Yeah, so 6th Squadron hasn't been away in a while actually, almost 18 months, which is quite rare for a Typhoon squadron, a frontline Typhoon squadron. I think we're kind of coming up to the more busy part of that cycle, so it works in cycles where you've got really high readiness, you deploy, or you're held at readiness and then you deploy, and then it kind of tapers back down again, and then you go through that cycle of training and getting ready again. When I joined the squadron, we were in our R7 period, if you will, which is sort of getting your currencies up, preparing to go routine flying, but also a bit of recovery from your last operation. So we've gradually since then been working up through to R2, which is sort of held at very high readiness. You could be sent away, you need to prepare to be sent away anywhere. And making sure that the pilots have all the currencies that they need, but equally all the ground crew have all their mods 1, 2 and 3 done, etc. We weren't sent away anywhere during our R2 period until now, so I think now kind of marks the start of really gearing up towards trying to get out the door for our op, and then the cycle continues and back down to a bit of calm after that, hopefully.
The nature of the facilities we had here in Australia meant that 6th Squadron were very much in the centre and the hub of the British facility we had, so we could see them working, and you have some juniors, some seniors, but it seemed to be a really well organised operation.
I'm glad that's how it appeared. I think there's always challenges with getting ready and deploying with such short notice. We had a little over 4 weeks to prepare, but luckily we've been doing some ops at home, sort of long shifts, 12 hours on, 12 hours off in support of EVA, which is the squadron's ongoing commitment to NATO over Eastern Europe. Launching missions from the UK, so that actually helped us to really gel as a squadron. We've been putting in the hours back home, so I think everyone's really happy to be away together now, and we do have a really good squadron. I'm really lucky. It was one of the first things I noticed when I got posted onto 6th Squadron was just everyone was really friendly and everyone speaks to everyone. There's no cliques, there's no sort of well, I suppose there's always a little bit of shift rivalry, but always in a fun way. But I knew that coming away, it would be a really good bunch of people to be away with.
It's the first time the Typhoons have been to Australia, and it is a remarkable distance to come. How important is it that we've accomplished that, come and exercised with partner and allied nations here?
Firstly, getting here in itself is a massive achievement, and I give huge credit to the trail team coming out here. The other Django did a fantastic job getting the jets here. I think once you're here then, working with the other countries, especially because of the distance you've come, you're probably working with countries you haven't worked with before, and I know for the aircrew that's been really valuable training, especially where in some cases there might be some language difference or differences in operating procedures. Learning how to plan and brief together has been really valuable for them. and also really good fun for them flying against aircraft and with aircraft that they haven't really seen up close before or had a chance to fly with. For us as ground crew, I think we very naturally worked quite well with the Aussies. We've got a very similar sense of humour, and they're very no-nonsense and really easy to work with. Nothing was too much trouble for them. The other countries that we're quite used to working with, I suppose, would be maybe the Americans and the Germans. We tend to find them other places that we go, and for us on Typhoon, having the Germans here was really useful. We were able to ask each other at various points in the det for assistance with things, and it's just very handy having another Typhoon squadron here, and we're quite used to working together from Biloxi, where we did 3 months of interoperability. So that kind of expectation that you could maybe lend each other favours was already set up. Some of the other countries that we haven't had a chance to work with very closely, some of our Asian partners and that sort of stuff, they've been really cool to get to know as well, especially at the international night, which was last week.
As the junior engineering officer, and just as a take home for the squadron in general, would there be any kind of learning points that you think, especially as you say, coming into this busy cycle, that you might factor in now going forward?
I think when you start getting into that busier period, especially when things at home have already been busy in a period which would usually be quite quiet, it is cliched, but it really has highlighted the importance of just looking after each other and offering to help with, you know, sorting out each other's admin or double checking, right, have you got this bit of paperwork done, or have you heard about that, you know, this brief is going on, that kind of thing. Like, you really have to pull together as a team. So I know some of the guys and girls have sort of, I suppose, found it difficult to sort out their home life in time to get away. And that's where that sort of team squadron mentality needs to come in.
The transport of our personnel, kit and aircraft across the world was the responsibility of UK MAMS. I spoke with Logistics Officer Flight Lieutenant Charles Ehay, who explains his involvement and responsibilities.
On the exercise, I was the dispatcher for all the trail aircraft that were tanking for the jets, but my main role was essentially on the trail from the UK all the way to Australia, 9,000 miles away, getting everyone here and taking us back, and that's my next job. There's a charter aircraft that will come out, leave here, back to the UK. We also have a sweeper aircraft, which would be the A400, which will take a majority of the freight, so usually that can fit quite a bit in there as well. On purpose, because of the amount of fuel we're taking on the Voyager, which I'll be following on the trail, we can only take so much, if that makes any sense, based on the balance of the aircraft.
And in terms of, the logistics of getting aircraft 9,000 miles across the world, how much planning goes into that?
There is a lot of thinking, planning, and rethinking and planning again. It's been great. I've had a great team with me as well, so definitely the mobile support force in Lossiemouth, and also my teammate, if I could put it that way, Corporal Paddington from United Kingdom Air Movement Squadron, UK MAMS, part of number 1 Air Mobility Wing. We were able to plan with others the trail coming here.
And then here, a really busy exercise, sorties 2 times a day?
Yes.
What was your role here on the ground?
Sure, so my role was essentially to dispatch all the tanker aircraft to the Voyager, the KC-30, essentially into the sky to give reach capabilities for jets to get fueled. My role was to dispatch that aircraft with passengers as well, and to see that go off and to return. And so that was my key role. Other than that, I was embedded with the Air Movement Squadron here with the Australians, and we collaborated with the New Zealanders, so the Kiwis, the Americans, etc.
It's my first det, admittedly. Yes. I was a little surprised by the amount of kit we've brought. Indeed. Probably not unusual. What's the process with regards moving all of that?
Sure, so the process is long and it's been planned. Majority of it was planned with air, the mobile support flight also in Lossiemouth. A lot of customs paperwork goes as well, because we are carrying not just regular kit, so bags, personal kit, etc., freight. But we're also carrying dangerous goods as well. So in the sense of, let's say, the life jackets the pilots wear, those had to get exemptions to be able to travel, and especially to all the nations we've gone through on the trail. So as you can imagine, every single country we had to make sure we met their exacting standards by the IATA, so the International Code of Conduct.
And I see them making a start here already. Of course, it's the final flying day of the programme. So now the work begins to pack up and move out.
That is true.
And you'll have a hand in helping how many nations move?
So it really all starts now, as you said. 17 nations are moving. So part of our interoperability is to be able to see how we will support the AMS, so Air Movement Squadron here. As you can tell, we depart on the 11th. However, many nations between now and then are going to be moving kit. It's about 38 movements we've heard so far, and that's for one day. So balancing rest, making sure the guys are getting their mandated rest, and then just plug it in where necessary. It's important. Also, I think the element of resilience will come into this as well. Pallets in this heat as well, so we are taking every single procedure to make sure everyone's taken care of.
Exercises focus on working with partner and allied nations. On exercise Pitch Black, the opportunity arose to work alongside them, not only in the skies above the Northern Territory, but, as we've been hearing, where our teams embedded with theirs. With the additional personnel on camp, there was a demand for 3,000 meals a day, and so additional manpower and culinary expertise in the officers', sergeants' and airmen's messes proved invaluable.
Yeah, Chef. So we'll break it down into a couple of people. So Spencer takes the curry. Dear love, if you go on the sausages. And then I'll do the teriyaki beef and the turkey. And then we'll see where we are about 10 o'clock tomorrow, prep-wise.
Thanks so much for stopping in the middle of lunch service to speak to me. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Sergeant Scotty Marks, based at RAF Waddington in Lincoln, and I run the Warrant Officers and Sergeants Mess and in-flight catering as well.
Tell me about the British contingent and where they've been pooled from.
All over the place, really. You got a few. The majority of us are from 3MCS at Wittering, and then the flight sergeant is from Honington, and then we've got another one from Lehman. He's a reservist, and someone from Waddow, Brize, Northolt. So yeah, all over the place. So we've got junior members that have only really seen and known contract catering. They won't have known DMR at all. So they've been sort of held to recipe cards and dictated what they're going to create on that day. Whereas out here it's completely different. And then our more senior members of our team that did know DMR and have had a bit more experience. So that was when it was like daily messing rate. So that was back when the Air Force used to run the catering. They've been able to mentor them on what it used to be like and how to be a little bit more creative as a chef. And then that's given them a massive opportunity and hopefully open their eyes to, go back to the UK and be a little bit more creative in their ways, like with functions and bits like that. And
you mentioned you're normally 3MCS. You're certainly not in a field kitchen here in Australia. Tell me about the facilities here at RAF Darwin.
Really good, honestly. Yeah. The mess is, the setup is, it just makes sense. I like the Australian way of thinking. They keep things basic, simple, that just do the job, and yeah, it's brilliant. Runs really smoothly.
I've been in as well, and the produce that I see you working with is exceptional.
The meat out here, especially compared to back home, is incredible. Like, I can't really get over the portion sizes, but I think their services is a bit different to ours, whereas they'll have more of a protein-based diet, not many carbs, and so it's just protein and salad. But the size and the quality of the meat is incredible compared to us.
When you get your group together, you're coming out to Australia, did you have an expectation to be embedded, and how did you think that might go versus how things have panned out now that we're coming towards the end of the exercise?
So it can be awkward when you go into anyone else's kitchen, even back in the UK. You know, say when we move around bases, or if you go and do an exercise on someone else's base, there can be some hostility, but there's been absolutely nothing here. Like from day one, it was straight in. They were really welcoming. We all fit in together, and it's not just us either. There's IAs, like they've got IAs involved as well from all around the country.
What are IAs?
Individual augmentees. So there's chefs from Brisbane and Adelaide, I believe. I'm not 100% sure on their other bases. But yeah, there's loads of them involved. We've got Canadians. Yeah, there's a big mix of everyone. And like I said, you know, from day one we came in and it just gelled. It just worked. I think it helps that everyone just wants to be a chef and wants to be creative and have their own little areas and showcase themselves and showcase their countries, which has really come across.
And I think you're probably like a week or two in, and next thing, an opportunity came about for yourself that maybe you weren't expecting.
Yeah, so I was given the opportunity to run the Airman's Mess, which feeds 600 plus every meal for a week. So John, the other senior NCO, he went through all the ordering systems, you know, all the processes that I'd need for the week, gave me a really good handover, and I had their junior NCOs to support me as well. Yeah, and it ran fine. It was, yeah, no dramas. It was really good, actually. It was nice having that week and having that opportunity.
All of these people and more besides make up the whole detachment, making sure exercises and operational tours achieve their objectives. But another group look after our welfare and are there when it really matters. The medical component were key to delivering point of need care, and like the chefs, were embedded with their Australian colleagues.
I'm Wing Commander Peter Gilbert. I'm a reservist medical officer in 4626 Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron in Brize Norton, and I'm here as the detachment medical officer.
I'm Sergeant Wendy McCleary. I'm based out of RAF Cam down at RAF Henlow, and I'm the environmental health practitioner.
You're half the team. 2 of your fellow colleagues are still working. Could you explain to me who's here in Australia as part of your detachment?
Of the actual clinical bit of the medical team, those of us who see patients, there are 3 of us. So myself as the medical officer, then I've got Flight Lieutenant Dave Bradshaw, who's a physiotherapist, who's also from 4626 Squadron, also a reservist. And then our paramedic is a regular paramedic, Corporal Liam Naylor, who is also from our parent organisation, which is the Tactical Medical Wing in Brize Norton. He's part of the DARTS team, which is the Deployable Aeromedical Response Teams Squadron. Bit of a mouthful. So we've got a nice combination of regulars and reserves in the clinical bit of the team.
And yourself, Wendy, your role a bit different but absolutely critical.
Yeah, so I'm technically still part of the medical team. However, I'm, like I say, not a clinic as such, but I'm what we'd call PrevMed. So basically my job is to try and stop the doctor and the paramedic having to do their jobs as much as possible.
And I remember the very first evening we landed here, we all sat down together. There was all sorts of briefings from all sorts of different leads. And then you stood up and there were a few gasps, I think it's fair to say, around the room. What sort of things did you have to brief us on?
So Australia is very similar to the UK in a lot of respects, but obviously there's some stark differences, and one of them being straight away the climate. So obviously, as you know, back in the UK, we're not used to this kind of temperature, we're not used to this heat. So climate was one of the ones I really wanted to concentrate on, because we don't want people falling sick with climatic injuries that we could prevent. And especially as for a lot of us, it was very short notice deployment, so we didn't have time to complete the full heat acclimatisation training. So that, and again, increases our risk of coming down with climatic injuries, which we want to prevent. And even things like, you know, the UV levels here are significantly stronger than back in the UK. So even if you just sat, you know, working out in the heat in the sun, you're going to get the effects a lot quicker. So that's one of the ones we really wanted to talk about on that briefing, just to make people aware of the lack of acclimatisation, how it's going to affect them when they're working. But another one, big one for me as well, is the biting insects out here. So it's particularly in this Darwin, Palmerston area, there's actually quite a lot of vegetation and standing water, which honestly I didn't actually expect. And because you've got all that standing water, you've got all those breeding grounds, you're going to have a lot of biting insects. And especially sandflies and mozzies are an issue where we have been. And that actually gets worse as well during the high tide, because our accommodation's actually very close to the coast.
Sadly, we have seen a few people with some really quite nasty bites. It's funny that a lot of people get away with it. Some people don't seem to get any bites at all, or maybe they get the bites and don't react to them. And then there's always a minority of people who have a real nightmare with it.
The crocodiles, the snakes, the spider side of things, I think it shook everyone a little bit.
Yeah. Australia is known for having quite a few things that do want to kill us. You know, not just, like I said, snakes, spiders, but also you've got the aquatic animals as well. I think that's probably what shocked most people, the fact that when I was saying to them, you can't just go down to the beach and just can't just swim wherever you like. Because especially around this area, we've got box jellyfish, which has one of the worst stings in the animal kingdom. And I think that probably shocked a lot of people. They couldn't just go to a lovely beach and just go swimming. They have to swim in specific areas, which I think a lot of people didn't really appreciate, because some of the beaches down here are stunning, but they can't go swimming for that risk of the box jellyfish or the blue-ringed octopuses as well.
Yeah, the list is just endless. With regards to the climatic piece, what can you do on a day-to-day basis to gauge stats and figures that can inform what decisions we make and how we best operate?
That would be the piece of equipment you saw me set up earlier on in the wet bulb globe thermometer. So that's a bit of a kit that goes everywhere with us when we deploy and go on exercises, that kind of thing. And it's part of a monitoring system of the environment. It's basically part of the commander's risk assessment to try and mitigate people coming down with climatic injuries. So it's not just there for the chain of command, but also for line managers managing the actual guys doing the physical work. They can have a look at that piece of equipment. For example, it could be, say, 30. They can then implement measures to reduce the risk of their guys coming down with climatic injuries, such as, more work rest break periods, more water breaks, having a more stringent work rest regime, shift patterns. So from a line manager's perspective, it's really handy for them to try and do stuff before anybody falls sick, because that's the aim of the game.
And sir, with regards preparations and coming out here to look after 170 personnel, what sort of things did you have to factor in?
Obviously, it's a huge country, and although the trawl was for a doctor to go to Australia, at that time we didn't know where in Australia. So the first question was, in this huge country, where were we going? Because that makes a vast difference to what we're talking about. And very quickly we learned that we were coming to Darwin, which is right in the north, in the very hottest part of Australia. So suddenly that shapes all your thinking. So obviously the heat was the immediate thing. And if I'm to be honest, I went to B&Q and bought a load of sprays and some sponges, and they've been in the emergency Bergen with the sprays full of water ready to go, but I'm pleased to say that with just a few days to go, we haven't had to use any of them. But obviously the heat was the most important thing, and then all the other environmental things that Wendy's already talked about. And I must say, I was very relieved to see that there was an environmental health practitioner as part of the team, because that makes a big difference to us. And then obviously thinking about the fact that we're coming to another country at the other end of the world, how we link in with the Australian services, just the practicalities of the fact that we've got equipment that we can set up and we can do a certain amount with that equipment, but at some point we might well have had to send people to hospital, ask for tests and things like that. So we're very much dependent on the host nation for that sort of work. And then the other aspect is that if anybody was seriously injured or did become significantly ill, we're a very long way away from home, and the practicalities of evacuating them back to the UK. So went along to the Aeromedical Evacuation Centre at Brize Norton and sat down with the team there to have a discussion about how we would get people back from Australia if we had to.
You mentioned our colleagues here, your medical colleagues, who you could fall back on should the need arise. How has it been being embedded in RAF Darwin's health centre?
So it's been really great. They've given us a couple of rooms, so we've got a very nice little facility. We bring our own primary care detachment set of equipment and drugs, and that allows us to run a reasonably comprehensive primary care service. So people who might come in with sprains and chest infections and things like that we can deal with, but they've also offered us the facilities, the liaison facilities to be able to help us when people have needed to go into hospital. We have had to send people in to be assessed in hospital and that sort of thing, and treated in hospital, and that's worked very well indeed. yeah, we've very much had what we needed here. And also, they're a great bunch of people who are very friendly, and we've had a very nice working relationship with them. So it couldn't have been better, really.
You mentioned at the top about Flight Lieutenant Dave Bradshaw with the dead physio. Some might think it's a peculiar thing to bring along. Why is a physio so important to the team?
So I think the best way to look at this is to use a Formula One racing analogy. So if you imagine Lewis Hamilton during a race, as he turns through the bends on the racetrack, his neck his head and his neck are subjected to considerable G-forces, and when he comes off at the end of that race, he's tired and his neck's aching, and he'll give his interviews, and then he'll almost certainly go and have a session with his physiotherapist, who will pull him around a bit and sort him out and get him ready for his next race, which will probably be in a week or two's time, and he'll have a nice bit of recovery time before he actually has to get back in the car. If you then look at a fighter pilot, when the Typhoons are pulling combat manoeuvres, the G that they're pulling is far greater than you would ever get in a Formula One car, and they have heavy helmets with night vision aids on the helmet and that sort of thing. So their necks are subject to really quite extreme stresses, as are the rest of their bodies. So in a perfect world, and obviously it's not going to happen at home, but it can happen here, the pilots can finish their sortie and can come in, and if they've got any sort of strain or stress in their bodies from from pulling the G during that flight, they can be seen by the physio, who will sort them out straight away. Now, why would we want to do that here and not necessarily have that available at home? Well, 4 Typhoons and the tanker have come 9,000 miles to take part in this exercise, and it's really important that we can take part effectively in the exercise. So the engineers are working flat out to keep the 4 Typhoons flying, the jets flying, and the physio is working to keep the pilots flying. And that's another reason why I'm here, because in the normal course of events, you wouldn't really need a doctor to look after 150 fit and relatively young people. But again, it's all about keeping the aircraft flying, keeping the pilots flying. So, for example, if a pilot is sick, the paramedic can tell the pilot that he's not fit to fly. The physio can tell the pilot that he's not fit to fly, but the only person who can tell the patient that he is fit to fly and allow him to get back into the jet when he's recovered is an aviation medicine qualified doctor. So that's the main reason why I'm here. But of course, the bonus is that people do injure themselves and do get sick in the normal way. So having a paramedic and a doctor and a physio here is actually quite useful for everyone. But it's really all about trying to give the pilots a bit of a Formula One service and making sure that they carry on flying throughout the exercise. And not to forget that the jets have got a 9,000 miles to get home as well. So they need to be at both the aircraft and the pilots are going to need to be at peak performance at the point that they leave here for that 9,000 mile journey home.
By now, I hope you'll have a good grasp for the people representing the RAF in Australia. To ensure the smooth running of the detachment, we had a number of people looking out for our welfare. The detachment admin officer, Flight Lieutenant Louise Tagg, was part of the forward party, ensuring we were set up in advance of the exercise.
As part of the deployed support group, we came out as a 5 to just make sure that everything we needed was in place for when the main party arrived a week or so later. So our job is predominantly to check the accommodation, to check that all the real life support, what we'd know as RLS, is in place, ready for everybody's arrival.
Is that tricky to do when we're so far away and maybe potentially in somewhere where we're exercising for the very first time? So a lot of unknowns, I imagine.
Absolutely. So ordinarily, for any operation or exercise, we'd always do a recce. Given the distances that we're trying to cover, that's just not practical. So by us arriving early, we can do a preliminary check to see what we've got and what we need.
As Deo, you're also here with regards to the welfare of the personnel we have here on the ground, 170 people. What sort of things has that meant you've been conscious of?
Being responsible for the welfare of 170 personnel is a big responsibility. We've been particularly lucky on this exercise. Things have gone fairly to plan, but it could be anything from making sure that people aren't out of pocket financially for the small things that they need to buy, but then at the other end of the spectrum, making sure that people's mental and emotional welfare is also taken care of. Everybody comes to this detachment with their own things going on at home, or even here, and it's just making sure that they've got enough support around them should anything crop up.
And finally, in your role, I feel like you must have great touch points with all the professions. There's a huge amount of different trades out here, some working independently, some very much more connected, but in your role, an ability to sort of have an overview of all of them.
Personally, I am fascinated by the trades that we have out here. So in my daily job back at home at Odium, I would never get to see the range of professions and skills that are out here on this deck. So for example, from the chefs to the photographers to the aircrew to the engineers, these are all the elements that make a detachment work effectively. And it's really fascinating to see what everybody does on a daily basis. So from a personal level, I've loved kind of just taking 5 minutes to go and see what people are doing. It's quite humbling actually when you see how much responsibility some of our guys and girls have got. It's really good.
And finally, bringing a detachment to Australia is no small undertaking. I chatted with the detachment's Chief of Staff as the trail party prepared to depart. With the exercise complete, Squadron leader Emma Carpenter was able to take stock.
It was hard work, but I think it's testament to the training that we've had before actually, and it was really good to see how everybody just came together as a team really quickly and got things done, and how the training that we do sort of day to day and in the months and years building up to it really helped us to get here.
Could you tell me the detachment, we exercise and we could easily focus on the jets in the sky in that aspect, but the detachment is 170 people strong.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just simply couldn't do it without the support elements. So one of the great things about coming here has been the opportunity to work with sort of branches and trades from across the Royal Air Force. Everything from, we've got caterers, we've got drivers, we've got movers, a med support team, we really couldn't do this without those people to come along and support. So it's been a fantastic chance for the whole team to work together and get a bit of a better appreciation of what other people do as well.
So as you mentioned, some of the trades and branches, the medics, the chefs and the drivers were embedded with our colleagues in the Royal Australian Air Force, and the exercise commander mentioned what a vital role they played and said he might call on that in a greater capacity again in the future. It's a great vote of confidence for our people and what they do.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a real sense of achievement for what they've been able to come and do here. A fantastic opportunity for learning on both sides. They've been able to see how the Royal Australian Air Force do things, and definitely some takeaways for us to go back to the UK with. But also the Australians have just been really grateful for the support that we've been able to provide, and they've been able to learn things from how the UK do it as well. So that's just a really brilliant opportunity, and I think testament to all of their hard work while they've been here.
And the final word goes to my interviewees, who share their det highlights.
Just to see how quickly 17 nations have gone from arriving in Australia, doing a week of integration training, but then to take it into a 50 v 80 scenario in a piece of airspace the size of Hungary, and to see it work, and therefore allowing us to just turn the dial up on the exercise complexity has been incredible.
I think for me it's often the journey. I always enjoy the trails out there because you see so many different places, you go through different parts of the world that you maybe haven't been before. So I always enjoy the adventure and the journey of getting there because it always throws up a lot of challenges.
I think honestly it's just been the weather. To wake up with blue skies and heat every day, it's been class. But I finally saw a wallaby last week as well, so that's that box ticked too.
So we've managed to get on croc tours. That was amazing. Just seeing the sheer size of them was incredible. It's an amazing part of the world.
The whole thing's been incredible. Just to come to the other side of the world and experience a different culture and be somewhere that you've never operated before, and it feels like home in the way that the procedures work, but it's just vastly different. and it's been an incredible exercise. It's probably been the best exercise detachment I've done in 20 years in the RAF, and I can't wait for a pitch black 2024, but I don't think I'll be getting on that really.
Personally, when we've had some downtime going to the saltwater crocodiles, that was an eye-opener how big the saltwater crocs actually get.
Well, I have to say, first of all, even before thinking about the highlights, I'm just completely blown away for being here at all. But also, the Litchfield National Park is amazing, and the plunge pools, the swimming in the waterfalls and that sort of thing, that will take an awful lot of beating.
I think the aim of our DET was defence engagement on a larger scale. Personally, I think we've been able to get amongst it, whether in a social capacity or in a physical capacity up in the air. Personally, I've been able to watch the refuelling process, for example, on the Voyager, which is something that in 8 years in the Air Force I've never seen. And it's impressive. This is what the Royal Air Force is about, and I just feel very privileged that I've been able to be a part of it.
I'm AS2 Ben Russell with Reheat for Inside Air. Low-level parachute trials from an Atlas C1 have been taking place over Salisbury Plain. Paratroopers from 16 Air Assault Brigade Combat Team and 3 Commando Brigade Royal Marines took part in the trials, which were delivered by 206 Squadron and the Joint Air Delivery Test and Evaluation Unit. RAF dispatchers from the parachute test team were also on board to coordinate the jumps. The trials represent a major milestone for the aircraft as it looks to take over the low-level parachuting capability from the C-130 Hercules, which is due to retire next year. RAF Voyager has conducted further air-to-air refuelling exercises with fast jets from the Qatar Amiri Air Force as part of exercise Soaring Falcon. It's the latest exercise in a series of deployments as part of an agreement with Qatar to provide an air-to-air refuelling service. 12 Squadron, the joint RAF Qatar Amiri Air Force Typhoon Squadron based at RAF Coningsby, has also deployed to the country to support air security operations for the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Aircraft from 41 Test and Evaluation Squadron based at RAF Coningsby have conducted a live fire exercise with the Royal Navy and United States counterparts on a decommissioned warship in the North Atlantic. RAF Typhoons launched Paveway 4 precision-guided munitions with support from a Royal Navy Wildcat helicopter, which used its laser targeting pod to highlight the exact impact point on the decommissioned frigate, the USS Boone. And in sport, the RAF's Orienteers completed 7 races in 7 days as part of a gruelling event in Austria. 2 RAF athletes secured podium finishes in the courses that were hosted in a mix of areas including urban, forests and mountains in Graz and Burgenland. And that's Reheat on Inside Air.
I'm AS1 Simon Ross with this episode's Name That Noise. That was the sound of the whistle used when raising and lowering the RAF Enzyme. Currently, the RAF Enzyme is flown from the flagstaff of every Royal Air Force station and has been permanently displayed on the cenotaph in London since 1943. The raising and lowering of the RAF Enzyme is a tradition which remains at RAF stations. The whistle itself is currently only blown when raising and lowering a large ensign for VIP visits and special occasions. The standard size ensign remains in place at all times to indicate a 24-hour operational service across the RAF. The RAF ensign as we know it today was first introduced in 1921. The design is a combination of the roundel used by the Royal Flying Corps and Royal Naval Air Service, combined with the Union flag as a mark of British authority. Chief of the Air Staff, Air Marshal Sir Hugh Trenchard, brought the design before King George V, who gave it his approval.
That's all for this episode of Inside Air. Please give us a review and subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and join us again soon.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.